Welcome to Vital Astrology. In my Vital Astrology video about the concept of thrones, I introduced the results of a recent breakthrough I made in my research. I presented this graph that illustrates the relationship between a planet's orbital frequency and the point in the zodiac which I call its throne. See that video for an in-depth discussion of the concept of thrones. This graph has profound implications for both physics and astrology alike. However, since this is a Vital Astrology video, we will just be looking into the astrological and healing implications here. We are going to do so by examining a particular case, that of the planet Sedna, which I find to be especially interesting. Sedna is what astronomers call a dwarf planet, a planet too small to be considered a full planet by them. She is a trans-neptunian object, which means that she orbits further from the Sun than the most distant full planet, Neptune. Sedna was discovered on the 14th of November 2003. She is one of the most distant trans-neptunian objects currently known. At present, she is quite close to her nearest approach to the Sun, or approximately 3 times more distant than Neptune. However, her orbit is very eccentric, and at her most distant she forays out roughly 10 times further than she is now. This gives her a very long orbital period of approximately 10,505 years, give or take 18. So she has a very low orbital frequency, and as we can see from the graph, that puts her throne at around 10.8 degrees of Gemini. Because of epiphysical reasons, which are far too much to go into now, whenever a new planet is discovered, the name that it is given tends to reflect the nature of its essence. Sedna was named after the Inuit Goddess of the sea. There are a variety of stories about how Sedna became the goddess of the sea. In one story, she was the daughter of Anguta, the Inuit creator god, whose name means man with something to cut. In that version of the myth, Sedna was a giant who had such a voracious hunger that she attacked her parents. So Anguta took her out to sea and threw her in the water. As she attempted to cling to the sides of his kayak, he cut off her fingers. Sedna then sank into the depths, where she became the brooding goddess of the sea. Her fingers became the whales, seals, and walruses that fed the Inuit people. But she was in constant need of being appeased in order to temper her capricious cruelty and to ensure good hunting. In another myth, Sedna is known as the girl who would not marry. To her father's chagrin, she refuses to marry any of the men of her tribe. Eventually, a mysterious stranger comes to woo her, and her father is happy to arrange the marriage. When Sedna is taken to live on her new husband's island, he reveals himself to be a great bird spirit, a petrel or sea crow. Sedna sends word to her father to come and rescue her from this unfortunate turn of events. However, as they are making their getaway in his kayak, Sedna's husband creates such a storm that her father eventually seeks to save himself by throwing Sedna overboard. Again, this ends by him cutting off her fingers, which become the whales, seals, and walruses. The cutting off of the fingers is a pretty gruesome part of the myth. In another version, Sedna's fingers freeze to the side of the kayak and break off, which is hardly less grotesque. If we are going to understand things more deeply, though, we have to look past the unpleasantness to the allegorical meaning. Here we find similarities to allegories in many other traditions. In the mythology of Northern European peoples, Tyr, or in Old English Til, the god of victory, allowed the embodiment of chaos, the wolf Fenrir, to bite off his hand, whilst the other gods took the opportunity to bind Fenrir so that he could no longer wreak the havoc he had been causing. The thing that all such allegorical stories are attempting to communicate is that sacrificing attempts to change the external world, as represented by the hands and fingers, is a prerequisite for turning within in order to overcome the chaos of our inner conflicts, or in Sedna's case, the bitterness of unresolved grief. Before I made the breakthrough that gave me this graph, I suspected that Sedna might rule Taurus because of the theme of food and hunger in the myths. Also, the marriage element suggested a Libran connection, and any planet that ruled Taurus would also co-rule Libra. Not realizing that Sedna actually rules a throne in Gemini, I speculated that there was another planet more distant than Sedna, which rules Gemini and co-rules Virgo. I named this planet Allies because I intuited that its essence would be best described by that rune. Now that I know that Sedna's throne resides in Gemini, I see that I was missing a huge clue which suggests that Sedna is in fact planet Allies. In an old rune poem, Allies is likened to elk sedge. Elk sedge is a grass which resembles the rune, having tough, razor-edged blades which grow outward from the central stem on both sides at an acute angle. If one grasps such a plant firmly and tries to uproot it, expect to get cut. Here in the description of the most powerfully protective rune's nature, we find the same allegory being used as in Sedna's mythology. When we contemplate Sedna's grief, we can see that it is also about protection, the protection that the father archetype failed to afford her. This is a picture of a book called The Ruins of Elfland, which I heartily recommend for the deep insights in its rune stories, and also, as you can tell from its cover, the beauty of its artwork. I had an amazing synchronicity with the book. The runes and bag that are in this photo were made without knowledge of its existence. Then, a few days later, I discovered the newly published book in my local bookshop. My favorite rune story and artwork in the book is for Allies. Here we see the daughter of a king, standing in a posture that forms the shape of the rune with her body, head, and arms. She holds aloft the singing sword, which she retrieved from her father's barrow. She did so because her land is being invaded by a fearsome foe. The singing sword can only be wielded by such a girl, and must not be drawn in anger. When she peacefully held the sword aloft in the face of the advancing army, it began to sing, and hearing it sing, the invaders knew that the power of the rune was with the girl, so they turned around in peace and left the land forever. In both the myths of Sedna and the nature of the Allies rune, we find the essence of what I am calling Sedna's singing sword. It is an essence that is very relevant for our time and the dire situation humanity finds itself in. But what is this essence? To answer that, we must look at what epiphysics has to say about Gemini and the essences of the planets with thrones in Gemini. Gemini, being a sign, represents a space of consciousness through which subjects move. Its essence is air of fire, which is about our individual perceptions of one's universal creative choices. Sedna, being a planet, represents a subject that moves through the space of the signs. She has an active essence with two components. The most prominent component is, like Gemini, air of fire, or one of perceiving one's creative choices. I want to stress the difference between Gemini's essence and Sedna's, however. Gemini represents perceptions, and Sedna the active perceiving of those perceptions. So, by perceiving our creative will, we move through Gemini, clarifying our perceptions of our creative choices. Thus we arrive at the final stage in the cycle of the evolution of life, the Cancerian stage, where the felt knowing of our creative will is fully integrated prior to the creation of a new cycle. Cancer's essence is water of fire, and represents the felt knowledge of one's creative will. It is realized by feeling that will, which is the major component of the moon's essence. It is an essence reflected in the time of the summer solstice, when honey is most abundant, the honeymoonth, when it was traditional for marriages to be performed. Even before Cancer is reached, though, there is a foretaste of that sweet Cancerian/moon essence. The second component of Sedna's essence is also one of feeling creative will. This shows us that it is the purity of feeling which confirms to us the clarity with which we are perceiving our creative will. The sharp focus of Sedna's air component is like the sharpness of lemon juice. The feeling component of Sedna's essence is what makes it sing. It sweetens things up, turning life's emotional lemons into lemonade. Let's draw all the threads of the myths and rune lore together to provide a holistic picture of Sedna's essence. In doing so, it is important to understand that everything that happens in the universe is governed by the cycle of the evolution of life. It is the purpose of life to evolve a constantly clearer and deeper knowledge of creative will. That necessitates the continual creative presentation of clues to help us realize new life axioms. These life axioms are truths which upgrade the foundations of our understanding of life. This is where it is important to stress the value of true understanding. Often, understanding is greatly undervalued in metaphysical circles because of the very insights portrayed in Sedna's mythology and the rune lore of Orlys. Thinking in the form of intellectualization and mental gymnastics is the major way that we turn the sharp significance of Sedna's sword against ourselves. That is a profoundly valuable insight, and yet it can lead one to make equally profound errors. Ultimately, the only things that can be wrong in the universe are thoughts. By that I mean, not that thinking certain thoughts is wrong. As we can observe in our current collective human condition, that idea can lead to the hating of certain truths and the projection of that hate onto those who would bless us with greater clarity. What I mean is that thoughts themselves can be wrong in the sense that they can contradict objective truth. Indeed, all thoughts are limited vessels by which we seek to convey meaning. Thoughts, though, are not what true understanding is made of. Many years ago, I asked my creative guidance about the nature of truth, and was given a powerful clue. It was the image of a bucket drawing water from an infinitely abundant well. The meaning was that the bucket is limited, and the water is not fundamentally bucket-shaped, yet the limitations of the bucket are required to bring the nourishment of truth into limited form. Thus, the infinite nature of truth is that it cannot be contained entirely in limited words or thoughts, and yet the evolution of limitations enables us to clarify a greater and greater approximation of that infinite essence. So, true understanding is not about intellectualization. It is about clarity, which can never be perfect, but is always evolving. New life axioms increase the size of one's bucket, and polishing its crystal structure increases clarity. Calming our circuitous intellectualization allows any cloudy sediment to settle out. I have long understood this vitally important knowledge about understanding, yet only very recently did I grasp how humanity has been led astray into a damaging disregard of its value and true nature. Whilst considering the extensions I wanted to make to Sedna's singing sword, I had an important insight about why understanding is not properly respected in some spiritual traditions. It is because our understanding of the cycle of the evolution of life has been confused and confounded. There is good evidence that the Sumerians considered Leo to be the first sign of the zodiac. If they did, their thinking was right. It aligns with objective truth. Leo is the first sign because the cusp of Leo is ruled by the totally fiery essence of the solar center. Cancer is the final sign because it completes a holistic knowing of that fiery creative inspiration. Cancer's essence represents our homey, familiar, felt knowing of the creative will we have realized. That necessarily comes after the life axioms it pointed out have been integrated and a new, clearer understanding has been built upon their foundations. Out of the secure and cozy felt ease of that Cancerian homecoming, a desire for new creative children is conceived and begun at the cusp of Leo. So Leo is the creative beginning of the cycle. For at least 2,000 years, Aries has been considered the first sign and Pisces the last sign. Some time prior to that, the old knowledge was lost or deliberately deleted. Thus, the essence of Pisces was presented as the ultimate spiritual goal. That is a serious spiritual error which persists to this day. Because they are all expressions of the essence of life, all the signs can be considered to be equally spiritual. However, Pisces is by far the most overtly spiritual because it represents the felt knowledge via which an awareness of the oneness of life can be experienced. Life, though, which is the reality of spirituality, is not just about Piscean oneness and blissful enlightenment, and as I just explained, that is not the final word life has to say about existence. It is not the end of the path. Because of the wrong idea that a Piscean perspective on things is the ultimate, the importance of the comparatively mundane appearance of Aries, Taurus, Gemini, and Cancer have been grossly disregarded. A true understanding of the zodiac thus informs us that we have to look more deeply at the expression of these last four signs to find a clearer understanding of what spirituality is really about. This world is like a collective computer game that we play in order to evolve the experience of our essential nature. Many gamers would do well to realize the truth of a Piscean perspective. In other words, that withdrawing from an overly intense and attached immersion in the game to a more blissfully detached enjoyment can be helpful. However, the attainment of bliss is not generally why people play computer games. It is not their true purpose. If I jumped into Fortnite and sat around doing nothing, I wouldn't last long. It might help my stress levels to decide not to care how well I was doing. However, a totally nihilistic attitude wouldn't prevent the other players from continually killing me. It would not be using the game for its proper purpose. Every game has an aim and a scoring system. Similarly, the purpose of this world is to experience our essential nature by continually realizing more of our creative will. The scoring system is a Cancerian one. It is the comfortable, familiar, and easy felt knowing we realize by using our Aries self-determination wisely. Thus we choose an easy Taurian reality and a clearer Geminian understanding of our creative will. Finally, we complete the realization of our creative will and the results of its new life axioms through our Cancerian felt ease. Thus we fully own the will that we formerly considered beyond our sovereignty by feeling the knowledge of it. That is the score of the game, the Cancerian point system by which we know that we are succeeding. Cancerian feelings are sweet, secure, and comfortable. They foster a homey sense of familiarity with the will we have owned. They represent the transformation of our suffering and repressed need into fulfillment. Such healing is inevitable, although creative reminders are often held in escrow in our neglected minds until we are ready to own the necessary axioms. They are the price of our healing. So it is important to honor the essence of Aries by choosing to assert ourselves wisely in order to create manifest Taurian ease, which in turn gives rise to a clearer Geminian understanding of our creative will and a purer Cancerian felt knowing of it. Then a whole new cycle can begin, founded upon a more abundantly creative Leonine energy. When we do honor the significance of these final 4 signs and their ruling planets, however, a puzzle arises. With her throne in Gemini, the essence of Sedna's role is to clarify the cozy, light-hearted sharing of Geminian discourse. That seems to be in stark contradiction to the gruesome myths. This is where the sharp significance of Sedna's singing sword comes into the picture. In order to realize our life axioms, clues are created to help us get their points. The significance of such a point is very sharp because it points to a single axiom amongst a potentially unlimited number of wrong ideas. The edge of Sedna's sword is the sharp focus that cuts away all other possible conclusions so that the truth stands out clear and unequivocal. So the edge of Sedna's singing sword is sharp, but so is the point of universal creative will. In the myths, the creative will of the universe is represented by Sedna's father, the creator god Anguta, and Sedna seems to run afoul of his sharpness. She is the girl who will not marry because the axioms she seeks are beyond what is currently familiar. This is represented by her great bird spirit husband. Via the eccentricity of her orbit, she repeatedly forays out into new depths of knowledge. By clinging to the familiar understanding of her creative will represented by her father's kayak, she resists the new axioms her husband represents, thus turning the sharpness against herself. Her husband creates the storm with the flapping of his great wings, which represents the disturbing and freezing effects of wrong ideas. Clinging to them, Sedna freezes her fingers so badly that they break off. This represents the immobility and pain of frozen emotions. When her father cuts off her fingers in the myth, it is allegorical of the fact that trying to force creativity to stay limited only invites disaster. Is such a gruesome outcome inevitable, though? That is a question that reveals an important point about love and creativity. In my video about the power ethic on my Humanities Soul Science channel, I go into depth about what makes for valid ethical values, the realization of which are supported by the cycle of the evolution of life. Essentially, there are 5 valid values, which are all the same thing, seen from different perspectives. They are love, creativity, objective truth, awareness, and personal evolution. The key thing to understand here is that objective truth and loving creativity are one and the same thing. Effectively, the sharpness of a creative point is one with the uniqueness of the life axiom it points to. This tells us something very important about what love really is. In my power ethic video, I quote a profound definition of love that I got from the works of the late great Dr. Arthur Janov. Love is giving others what they need to be their real selves. See that video for a more extensive discussion than I can afford here. The key word is real. Universal creativity is always perfectly and unconditionally loving, because it always gives us exactly what we need to be our real selves. That includes the freedom to seem to screw up and handle Sedna's sword carelessly. If we get our metaphorical fingers frozen or cut off, it is not all Yee's fault. The protection of that rune's essence is passive. It hurts only those who wield Sedna's sword with anger and violence. In the rune story, the singing sword is wielded by the daughter of a king, because she is allegorical of a feminine essence which honors the true sovereignty of creativity. The purpose of creative will is always to bless her with the song of her own fulfillment. All planets which have their thrones in Aquarius and beyond can appear dark to those who disrespect their creative reminders and try to force them to conform to an old, limited set of life axioms. Thus, the self-inflicted pain of mishandling Sedna's sharp significance casts a shadow on the blessings such planets offer. It is often an uphill climb from Leo to the cusp of Aquarius, but once an axiom has been realized there, a transformation occurs, and everything is downhill. The physic for our self-inflicted wounds is Sedna's co-rulership of Virgo. It is why Virgo is about healing, which means to make whole. Inner conflicts are due to cutting ourselves on Sedna's sword edge. To make it sing with the sweet balm of her nurturing moon-like dimension, we have to be willing to see how we are harboring wrong ideas about our creations. Take another look at the way the king's daughter is handling her singing sword. In peace, she holds it gently by the blade, but takes great care to avoid cutting herself on its edge. Virgo is the sign of taking care. It is by taking care in a way that makes Sedna's sword sing that the deeper healing of caring, compassionate Pisces is realized. Geminian open-mindedness is essential for the healing process to start. It is the humility to be willing to see that we have been attached to wrong ideas. That doesn't mean we have been wrong in our true identity. Nobody is ever wrong in their essence. As I said, the only things that can be wrong in the universe are thoughts which contradict reality. So by clinging to wrong ideas, we can be in the wrong, but we can always decide to let go of such misjudgments. In summary, Sedna's essence is a vital one for this time in history, when the power ethic seems set to completely overwhelm humanity. One way or another, we will get the points that creative will is blessing us with. When we are determined to ignore our pointers, we get the point in painful ways. In other words, acting as if a blatant truth is insignificant, we are bound to come a cropper. The sharp significance of Sedna's sword is a tool we can all use to focus in on our axioms. It is protective because the sharpness of creative will is never meant to hurt us. We do that to ourselves by being closed-minded and thus dull-edged. Creative pointers are there to bless us with greater understanding, freedom, and fulfillment. In my next Power Ethic video, I will be discussing how the careful objectivity required to make Sedna's sword sing can vastly improve upon the errors of what has become known as the law of attraction. I will explain how to cultivate the faith to move metaphorical mountains. It is the only way out of the bind humanity is in. It is objectivity full of care. That is all for now. Thank you for your attention.